Hi, my name is David Kelsey, and we're going to today be doing some exercises, some practice exercises on Lecture 1 of my Critical Thinking course. So the first set of exercises we're going to be looking at is just on the basic idea of whether or not you have an argument present, right? And secondarily, if there is an argument that's being stated, can you find the conclusion of that argument? Right? The conclusion is always that claim that's being supported in the argument. So here we have a number of exercises, and what we're going to do is just go through the list and try to determine if there's an argument and why there might be, and then if so, what the conclusion would be. Okay? So the first exercise we have here, the first example, it says, "Hey there, Marco, don't go giving that cat top sirloin. What's the matter with you? You got no brains at all." So the question you have to ask yourself here is whether or not there's a reason being given in favor of a conclusion, right? And looking at this one, I think it should seem kind of clear that you don't really have any kind of reason being given at all, right? You just have a kind of, almost, it seems to me like a kind of verbal tirade on someone for, for giving their cat the wrong food, right? And I don't really see any kind of reason in favor of a conclusion. In fact, I'm not really sure there's a conclusion here at all. It just seems like a series of kind of complaints against Marco there, Okay? So that one doesn't actually have an argument, all right? Second example, it says, if you've ever met a pet bird, you know they are busy creatures, right? And I think here again, we really aren't really looking at an argument. Right? This is just a statement really about pet birds and how they're busy. And you don't really have, I think here, you don't really have any reason for that kind of claim. And this is an interesting one because it kind of looks like a conclusion is being stated, namely that, pet birds are busy creatures or something. But the thing that disqualifies this from being an argument is the fact that you don't really have any kind of reason being given, no evidence in favor of that. Okay? Our third example says, since you want to purchase the house, you should do so before June. Otherwise, you will lose that great interest rate. Now, here we have an argument, right? The argument is easier to see because you can kind of see the reason that's being stated here pretty easily, right? The reason it says, otherwise, you will lose that great interest rate. And then the conclusion that supports is that you should purchase the house before June. Right? And I think here one way to see that is the idea that comes in again with those indicator words. You have this word otherwise here. At the beginning here, you also have this indicator of since. Right? I think the otherwise, what it does is it tells us that you have a reason being given. And it makes sense too, right? If you lose your interest rate, that's not a very good thing, right? So makes you want to buy that house before you do, right? So you have an argument, okay? Now the next example says, Carl would like to help out, but he won't be in town. We'll have to find someone else who owns a truck. Now again, here you have another argument, right? The first claim, Carl would like to help out, but he won't be in town, is our reason. And the second claim there is our conclusion. We'll have to find someone else who owns a truck, right? The idea is that if Carl can't help out, then we've got to find somebody else, right? If Carl can't help out, that's the reason. So we'll have to find someone else who owns a truck. That's your conclusion stated, okay? Our next example, it says, 30 years ago, people used landlines or payphones. Now everyone has a cell phone or a portable computer of some kind. Times have changed. This is a nice one because that last sentence there, times have changed, should kind of stand out to you, right? It indicates, hey, ding, 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 here's a kind of important claim. And in fact, that's actually the conclusion of this argument, right? The premises are that 30 years ago, people used, landlines and payphones. And then secondly, now everyone has a cell phone, right? And then your conclusion that supports is that times are different now, they've changed, okay? The next example says, Lucy's too short to reach the bottom of the sign. You can see with this one here that there's no conclusion and reasoning given in favor of that conclusion. In fact, it just seems to be a kind of statement, right? And you might again think that that's kind of a conclusion or a position that's taken, but again, there's really no evidence or reason provided, and so we don't really have an argument here, okay? The last example that you get says, since I'm here right now, I cannot be over there, right? And again, you have here straight away this since word, right? It's this indicator word. Always a good indication that you have an argument when you have a word like that. So since is a premise indicator. So what it's essentially saying is that I'm here right now is a reason that I cannot be over there, right? So the conclusion here is that I cannot be over there. The reason is I'm here right now. And so you have, again, here with the last one, another argument, okay? Okay, well, that's the set of exercises that we're going to cover with the question of whether or not you have an argument. We have one more set of exercises to go over for lecture 1 here about issues, and so we'll do those now. And really, this set of exercises is just to sort of determine what the issue is in the given passage. And so you're given a bunch of passages, and you've got to try to find and sort out what the issue is in each of them, okay? So the first example here says, we have no choice but to take the truck, for the couch won't fit in the car. Okay? Now, the best way to find the issue of a passage is, if you can, to find first the conclusion of it. Because the conclusion relates to the issue like this. Whatever the conclusion is, that's the answer to the issue. All right? So the idea is that if you're able to sort out what the conclusion is, then if you can just phrase that as a question, that would be your issue, right? So find the conclusion and phrase it as a question, and then you have your issue, okay? So it says here, we have no choice but to take the truck, for the couch won't fit in the car. The conclusion here seems to be that we have no choice but to take the truck. And you have also, because you have this indicator word there, for, right? And so what for does there is it tells us that the couch won't fit in the car. That's a reason for us having to take the truck. Okay, so the conclusion of our argument here is that we have to take the truck. Okay, and so we might phrase that, we might phrase our issue then as whether or not we have to take the truck, right? And so then that's the issue. The conclusion then is yes, we do. All right, so our issue for that first one is whether or not we have to take the truck. Now our second example, right, it says, an animal that will walk out into a rainstorm and stare up at the clouds until water runs into its nostrils and it drowns. Well, that's what I call the world's dumbest animal. And that's exactly what young domestic turkeys do. Now, this one is interesting because the conclusion isn't actually stated here. The conclusion of this argument is that young domestic turkeys are the world's dumbest animals, right? And you can kind of see that from what's stated there, right? The argument is kind of implying here, the passage is kind of implying that young domestic turkeys are the world's dumbest animals. So the idea then is that, again, what we want to do to get the issue right is just to phrase that, to rephrase that as a question, right? And so the question might be, the issue might be something like whether or not young domestic turkeys are the world's dumbest animals, right? And so that would be our issue. Again, whether or not young domestic turkeys are the world's dumbest animals. That's our issue for that one, okay? Now, the third example, it says, let me tell you why you shouldn't take Professor Johnson's philosophy class. You think concretely, and philosophy is super abstract and deep, plus Mr. Johnson doesn't give out many A's, and you are trying to keep a 4.0 GPA, right? Now, you can see here it says, let me tell you why, right? And that seems straight away to be a kind of suggestion, right? So the conclusion of our argument here then is that you shouldn't take his philosophy class, right? And so the issue then would be whether or not you should take Mr. Johnson's, Professor Johnson's philosophy class, okay? The next example says there are tons of good prospects in the draft this year, but only a couple shortstops. But the Yankees need a great shortstop, and Jason is the best of them, so the Yankees will certainly take him in the first round. Okay, that's kind of a mouthful there, and there's a lot going on. There's a lot of buts and so on, and a so at the end. And really, that's, to me, that's the indicator here that I spot first, is that so. It says, so the Yankees will certainly take Jason in the first round. And that's actually the conclusion of this argument, that they're going to take him in the first round. And so the issue then would just be to rephrase that as a question, which is something like whether the Yankees will take Jason in the first round. That's the issue. Okay, the next exercise here, the next problem says this. It says that iPad will handle any task your computer can. You just need the keyboard that goes with it, and you are all set. Okay, and really here I think you can kind of see the relationship as the second claim being a reason for the first. And so you just need the keyboard that goes with it and you're all set. That's a reason for the iPad being able to handle any task your computer can, right? And so your issue again is just to rephrase that claim as a question, which is something like whether the iPad can handle any task your computer can, right? The last example that we'll work with here is about coffee. It says, this coffee has to have loads of caffeine. It's a light roast, and those have the most, right? I think this is a pretty simple and straightforward one. The conclusion here is that this coffee has to have loads of caffeine, right? And of course, the reasons are that it's a light roast, and the light roasts have the most. So if the conclusion then is that the coffee has to have loads of caffeine, then the issue, of course, is just whether this coffee has to have loads of caffeine or not, right? And so that would be the issue on that last one there. So that's the exercises. I hope you got a sense of determining the issue in a passage, finding the conclusion as well, and then as with the last set of exercises, whether whether or not we can find in passages arguments or not, right? So hopefully that will help you start to apply these concepts a bit, and this will help you do well on the exam. All right, thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.